one thing I've learned, not just as a writer, but as a human being, is we are never going to please everyone.
Thanks for watching Hot Flashes and Cool Topics podcast. Be sure to subscribe and ring that bell to catch all of our conversations. Now, on to the show.
Welcome back to Hot Flashes and Cool Topics. Today we are talking to Maggie Smith. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Well, we were excited for this conversation because so many of our listeners and Bridgett and I, we have stories to tell. The longer that you live, the more stories you want to share. And some of our listeners will say, I'd like to write something. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a book. It could be a journal, it could be a story to your children, whatever that might be, but they don't know where to start.
Yeah.
So your book is out now. It's called Dear Writer, Pep Talks and Practical Advice for the Creative Life. And you certainly have a lot of experience in creativity, but it's kind of a how-to book on how to get started and where to go. Why write this book now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think and women, I think in particular will understand this. I think I needed to get a couple decades of experience under my belt before I felt like I even could give myself permission to write a book telling other people what I've learned in life and how to maybe apply that knowledge. I don't think I could have written this book in my 20s when I was just getting started and figuring it out for myself. And frankly, in my 30s, I was raising kids and I trying to compile a bunch of classes and talks and conversations about writing would have been a little unmanageable. I couldn't even get time to take a shower without someone opening the curtain and asking me questions. You know how that those years
We
are.
can relate to
You
that.
know.
Yes.
So this is the time where I'm like, oh, my first book came out 20 years ago this year. And which seems impossible to me because I feel like I'm reverse aging, so that seems impossible to me. But I think I finally gotten to a place where I've compiled so much information, and wouldn't it be fun to house all of that in one place and be able to hand it off to another person and say, if you don't know where to start, maybe start here.
Right. And a thing that really stood out to me in the book that you said everybody starts out as a writer, but something happens along the way that stop them. And I feel like that's happened to me. Things like that you learn in school and this is wrong, the grammar's wrong or my sentence is wrong. What could you say to somebody that said, okay, that got squashed? What can I do? I want to get it back. What is something I can do to get that back?
Yeah, that's why a big part of this book is pep talks. It comes in the subtitle even before practical advice, and every section in the book begins with a pep talk that's a writer directly to, arranged directly to the reader. And so I think what we need to get started, whether we've been doing it all along or whether we've kind of like fallen off the writing wagon, is we need two things. We need tools and we need a gentle nudge in the right direction of encouragement. If you give someone tools without encouragement, that's useful, but they could use the boost. If you give someone a pep talk but don't give them any practical advice, they might be energized to begin, but then what do they do? So I really wanted to put both of those things into this book for those people in particular, because yeah, I think as kids we're also creative. We're drawing, we're coloring, we're writing little songs and jingles to ourselves, or writing stories or poems, or performing plays with our friends in the backyard or in the parents' living room. And then somewhere along the way, whether it's through schooling or having to sort of start a life and become a grown up and become quote unquote responsible, a lot of us let that play, that creative mischief go. And whether we do this professionally or not, I think there's so much value to each of us in letting ourselves play artistically in that way.
And play does become more important as we get older. It's true. We talk to a lot of experts about the importance of play. You talk about creativity being our birthright, which is
Mm.
a little bit what you touched on there, and that we get off track. And I think that's true of a lot of things that we have desires. And, when I read someone, or I shouldn't say when I read someone, when I hear someone wrote a memoir at 25, like a celebrity or something, I go, how could you possibly have anything? How did you get a 200-page book? of a memoir, age 25. You simply haven't lived enough. With the book that you've written, I love that you divided into kind of 10 different elements of creativity. Again, a starting place for people. And attention is the first thing. And like you were saying, when we're going through life, we don't always pay attention to the important things. So, how can one start to pay attention in order to let that creativity through?
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, I think attention comes first for a reason. If I had to boil down to one in this book, I just realized this thinking and hearing your question, I would boil it down to that one.
Okay.
Attention is the key, and not just for making art or writing. Attention is the key for living. I always say all of the most important things that I use in my life as a writer, I also use in my life as a mother, and as a friend and as a daughter, and as a partner, like all of those things. And one of those things is paying attention, like being present, not scrolling your phone constantly, not trying to multitask constantly in a world where we're sort of being bombarded all the time. And so, one of those things is what would happen if you left your phone in your house and took a walk in your neighborhood? That seems like such simple advice, even if it's just for a half an hour, or just put it in your bag, or listen to music, but don't be thumbing your way through it as you're out and about. But in particular, just unplugging a little bit from screens, going for a walk or a drive, or even just sitting outside or sitting by a window, listening to the birds, listening to the wind in the trees, listening to the neighbor kids play, hearing a dog bark in the distance, just reminding yourself that you're a human being in the world and that you don't need to be sort of chained to all of these other things. I think people underestimate how powerful 30 minutes of free time can
Right.
do, right? To
Yeah.
pay attention and really have a sensory experience, like really noticing what's around you, the color of the sky, the consistency of the clouds, the sounds you hear, the textures you see, like really just feeling grounded. Even therapists will tell you that. If you're stressing or even or having a panic attack or feeling anxiety, what do you feel in your body? What do you see? What's in the room that you're in, just to ground you? And so that's I think easy advice that any of us can follow.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned the senses and you mentioned that in the book. And I was an elementary school teacher, and that was at like, first, second grade. If we started that, we always talked about the senses. And one of the things that I love too is that with your family, is it a beauty emergency? Is that
Yeah.
can you talk about what that is? I thought I loved it.
Yeah, I posted one on my Instagram recently. Beauty emergency.
Yeah.
It's what the phrase that we use in our house for when something is beautiful and fleeting. It's going to disappear quickly, and so everyone has to run to see it. So, like a hot pink sunrise is the one that I took some photos of the other day, or the moon looking just right behind the clouds, or a rainbow, or whatever the case may be. Something that if you don't run to see it or take a look and pay attention again right away, it will be gone or will change. And so I used the phrase because when my kids were a little younger, just yelling sunrise doesn't get people to come running to you, right? But if you yell emergency, people come to you. It's like yelling fire in a crowded theater, but in a positive way. So I would yell beauty emergency, and the kids would come running, and we'd all look at whatever the thing was. And so just the other day, my son, who's now 12, he's a middle schooler, yelled beauty emergency. And we all had to go look and take pictures of this beautiful, like pink and purple and blue sunrise. So again, it's about paying attention. And I think, this is something I talk to my students about, but it's obviously the way I parent too. Like I'm always trying to get my kids, whether we're on walks or just in the house, to like put their antenna up and dial into the world they live in. And so that's become a big part of our lives here.
Yeah, just on, was thinking about that and the beauty emergency. And when I started teaching, we were throwing away the editing, punctuation, spelling for writing. And oh my goodness, we had the worst time with parents understanding that we were like, so can you talk about why? I mean, you probably, I don't know. I just thought about it when I was reading your book, how we did that. We said, we just want you to write.
Yeah.
Well, and also I
It-
think just along those lines, you don't really agree with a writing schedule. I think a lot of people talk
right.
about you must write 1,000 words a day. It doesn't matter what. But along those lines, what Bridgett is saying, you don't really believe in a writing schedule. And I think a lot of people think if I'm going to write, I need to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think both of those things are about freedom to create on your own terms, right? So as a kid, if you are allowed to just free write and not be worrying about the capital letters for proper nouns and at the beginning of sentences, and if you don't worry about where the commas and periods have to go, and you can almost kind of stream of consciousness some writing, I think that's really permission giving to kids. Frankly, if you just told a college student, just free write and don't edit yourself. I tell my grad students this: sit down with a pen and a legal pad and just write. Don't worry so much about where it's going. Don't second guess yourself. Don't start revising as you go. Just get it all down. Give yourself permission to just get it all down. And then you can go back with a different part of your brain and weed through all of that beautiful mess and see what you have. And then you see that the sort of rough, that's the clay, the lump of clay that you have to work with. And then you start sculpting it, right? And I think it's the same thing with the schedule. I'm actually I admire people who have a writing schedule. I think if you can sit down at the same time every day and write for the same amount of time or a certain number of words, I commend you. I think that's incredible. I don't do it, nor do I feel guilty about not doing it. And I think for a lot of people who either are caregiving, whether it's parents, aging parents, or kids, or grandkids, or for health reasons, that's not possible, or for work reasons, that's not possible. There are a lot of us who would love to have the freedom to do anything every day at the same time, and that's not how our lives look. So, what I want to do is just make sure that people know that's not a prerequisite. Like, as long as you do it, no, you get to be a writer, even if you only have 20 minutes, not at the same time, 3 times a week. It's not, no one's testing you. You don't get a merit badge for doing it a certain way. The most important thing is that you just prioritize it. If it makes you happy, find a way to do that.
Yeah. I'll go ahead, Colleen,
No, I
because
was
I had
just
asked
saying,
the
do your
last one.
grad students look at you crazy when you say legal pad? They're like,
You
write it
know,
on
I don't,
paper?
no, I don't think so. I mean, and yes, of course, I know I have them too. And yes, of course, I mean, but the other thing is, yes, if you want to open a doc, a Google
Right.
Doc or a Word
That's what I
doc,
was curious about. Is it better to have a pen and paper and just
yes.
write?
It
Mhm.
is. I mean, I write first longhand almost all the time, mostly because I never learned how to type. That is the truth. I do not know how to properly type, and so I'm slow and inaccurate. But my brain works at the speed of my hand. So I'm able to get more down in that sort of pre editing stage, that initial love affair drafting stage with a piece of writing with my hand. But it's also true, and there's neuroscience behind this, that writing things down, we process things differently in our brain when we handwrite versus when we are on a keyboard. We remember things better when we write them down than when we text them into the notes function on our iPhones or send them in an email. There is something that gets sort of hardwired into our brains, probably from childhood, that associates handwriting differently in our brains. So I actually do. I know I'm old fashioned, but I advocate for that.
Well, all three of us, we are writers. I mean, I could get notes about someone we're interviewing, but I have to write it. But like you said, it's something that just stays there in our brain. I also really like how you include in there that, we might start out, we feel like we're writing for somebody else.
Mm.
But can you talk about when it comes to that point where we know that we're writing for ourselves?
Yeah, I always write for myself first. And maybe that sounds maybe that sounds selfish, but I really, unless I'm doing some sort of commissioned work, if someone asks me to write something for a specific audience, that's a different gig. But for me, when I'm writing my own poems or essays or stories, I'm writing for myself. I'm the audience. And I'm competing with myself, not with other writers or other books, right? And so at a certain point, before I have to kick that thing out of the nest, if I do want to publish it, I do have to think about the reader's likely experience of that piece of writing. It doesn't mean I'll change it for them, but I at least want to consider that this is not something that's going to exist just with me. And I think that's why when we get to the stage of sharing, we are reading closely. We do care about capitalization and punctuation. We do care about how a thing is organized. It's different from having a conversation with a friend and telling a story. You really do want to kind of sculpt it and shape it on the page. But I advise not worrying too much about that in the early stages because you'll kind of box yourself in.
Right.
Yeah.
I like also at the end of each section you do a generic writing activity to kind of create, it's like homework, but in a good
Yeah.
way. And you have you do book recommendations, research, future, which I love that you're supportive of other people who are writing as well. Why do you think it's important that someone read that chapter and then say, okay, I'm going to do some type of writing activity?
Yeah, I wanted it. I love it. It is kind of homework, but it's not what homework is. My kids would say, homework is required at school, mom. And I'm like, this isn't required, right? It's more of an invitation. So I'm inviting the reader at the end of every section to try out something that I've talked about in that section. You don't have to, you can skip right by it if you want to. But my hope is that it will be kind of energizing and fun to dip in and maybe experiment a little and try something new. And then those reading recommendations, I love when a book sends me to other books. I love that kind of community space that books create when they reference other things, and then you can kind of go off into a different rabbit hole and find things to read. So I would love if people closed Dear Writer and had some interesting first drafts of some things under their belts because they took a chance and accepted my invitation and tried some things, but also had like a long list of things they wanted to reserve at their local library, or they wanted to walk into their independent bookstore with a post-it note that had some things written down to see if they can get a hold of any of those things. That to me is like bonus.
Right. And I love too how you said, when whenever you go write, or if you're going to a coffee shop or wherever you're going, you bring a book with you. And can you talk about why you do that?
Yeah, to me, it's like a springboard or it's kind of like a conversation starter, but the conversation I'm having is with my own mind. So if I sit down at a coffee shop and I open a book of poems or a, it could be a science text. It doesn't have to be poetry. It can be anything. It could be a novel. I open it up and I read a few sentences or a poem. It's inevitable that something I read, whether it's a phrase, an unexpected vocabulary word, if it's a science text or something, I'm like, oh, what does that mean? Or that word reminds me of something else. I wonder if those two things are related. Or the syntax, like just the sentence structure of something that I can kind of borrow and plug my own words into. That's for me a way to get started. I don't know if people think that professional writers just sort of sit down in front of a blank page and the ideas just come flowing through. That is not at all what happens, at least not for me. I really do need maybe the walk between my house and the coffee shop inspires me because I'm hearing and seeing things if I'm paying attention. And if nothing comes on that walk, then I've got a book that I can page through and get some ideas. So I recommend that. Like reading is a gateway to writing.
You also talk about the fact that metaphors are the most important part in your toolbox, piece in your toolbox. Why is that? Because we're going to get into metaphor, simile, and Bridget's favorite, alliteration.
Oh,
She
alliteration.
lives for.
Oh, the tongue twister territory. Yeah, I mean, I don't. Metaphor is sort of my currency. Like most poems, I would argue, have a kind of metaphor-based center of gravity. The meaning in the poem and the sort of weight of the poem is in this comparison that's being made. And it's being made in a way that you're like, ah, I'll never see or think of that thing in the same way again because now I'm looking at it through the lens of this metaphor. Um, I think a lot of people think metaphor is tricky, like saying one thing is something else. And what I always tell students is it's basically a two-step process. And if you think about it this way, it breaks it down really easy. One, a sensory observation. What do you see? What do you hear? What are you touching? What does it feel like? Just describing that sensory observation. And then two is, okay, what does that remind me of? That's not a hard question. What does this texture remind me of? Like wet tree bark. Oh, it's kind of like leathery. Oh, that's interesting. Or this leaf feels like paper. Or that bird sounds like dot dot dot. That's where metaphor comes from. It's not rocket science, as we say, right? So that kind of two step is something you can teach a 6-year-old that two
Right.
step.
Hmm. Yeah. And it's we can go ahead with the other parts too, then, Colleen, since you brought it
Okay.
up. Yeah, I was going to go to another one. I was like, no, let's continue this for now. Yeah.
Well, no, it's just that's the aspect. It is in this section of wonder that you were talking about.
Right.
And I think another thing that people really struggle with when they want to write is if they have stories to tell, it opens them up. They have to be vulnerable.
Oh, sure.
How is this going to be received? How vulnerable do I want to get? Which stories do I want to tell? Where do people go with that?
Yeah, that's the honestly one of the questions I get most often is some version of how do I write the thing I can't bear to write? Or how do I tell the thing I can't bear to tell? Because if you're scared to say something, that's probably where you need to begin your storytelling. Like, and I think I know all of us have stories, but some of us, maybe even many of us, have burning stories that live inside of us that maybe we've told the story to a few friends, but we haven't let it really live and breathe anywhere. And so how do we get the guts to do that? And I think one of the things we've already talked about is a key, which is not thinking too much about where a thing is going to go or who is going to see it when you start. So I always advise writing as if it's sort of like dancing like no one's watching. Write like no one's going to read it, first draft. Just get it all down. Don't censor yourself, even the parts that are the scariest to tell, right? Get that information down in your draft. You will have time later then to decide who was the audience for this story. Maybe it's just my daughter. Okay? Maybe I'm not sending this to a magazine. Maybe it's just I want my kids to know about this part of my life. So if I'm going to share this with my daughter, now let's read this draft through the lens of what I think it would be like for her. Is there anything in this draft that I think would be especially painful or weird for her to read, and is it essential to the story? If it could be painful and it's actually not essential, like the story still works, if you don't give everything away, you hold some things back and set some boundaries, play with removing that. Save that draft, rename it, version 2 or revision so that you still have the writing that you did in that first draft. It's not gone, but save a new version that you think might be safer for that audience's eyes. That I think is maybe the best way to approach writing the hard things and being vulnerable is letting yourself do it just for you first and not worrying about other people seeing it, and then tailoring the thing that you are comfortable to share
Right.
for whoever you think you're going to share it with.
Yeah, I always feel like those parts of the book or anything that I read when the people are so vulnerable in it, that is that makes the best stories. That's what I
Yeah.
feel. I always feel like, wow, they really bared their soul here. And that had to be hard to do. And I don't know, it makes me more empathetic to the writer. And I find it more interesting. What happens when, and I know this happens, you're writing and you're stuck. You're
Uh,
getting stuck. What's some good advice there?
yeah, I mean, I think there are two things. One, if you're writing and you're stuck and you're a student and you have a deadline, right? If you're a student and you have something due, or you're a writer and you have a deadline, you have to find a way to get yourself unstuck. And I hope that some of the exercises in Dear Writer would be useful for that, because I do address that. But for most of us, if we're just writing for ourselves, or maybe we plan on writing for others, but we're not on a deadline, we've got plenty of time, my feeling is just set it aside. And again, don't feel bad if you're not writing every day at the same time, banging out a certain number of words. If you feel stuck and something isn't coming and it doesn't feel pleasurable to you to be doing it, time never made anything worse. A lack of time has made plenty of things worse, right? Rushing. But setting something aside and trusting future you to come back to it in a week or a month or 6 months and look at it with fresh eyes, chances are something will click in you and you will see the next step to take, or you'll see something you want to change, or you'll get an idea for how to take it in a new direction or add to it. But yeah, I think cutting ourselves some slack is a good way to approach it.
Mm.
Under the vision section, you talk about making yourself your own uncool and not necessary. It's okay to not be liked. And I think in this social media crazy world, people are just so cruel and really, hide behind the anonymity. But you're saying it's okay if you make yourself uncool first and say it's okay not to be liked, then maybe it's not as shocking or hurtful when you start getting those reviews or responses that are not kind.
Yeah, it is hard. None of us are immune to it, right? It doesn't matter if you're working on your first book or publishing your 20th book. Um, People's opinions can lift you up or tear you down, right? That's none of us ever outgrow or become exempt from the judgments of others. And I mean, one of the things that make us trust writers, like you were saying, Bridgett, I think is when they're open and vulnerable with us, and it makes us feel sort of less alone in carrying our own stuff. But it also makes us feel like we're in community and we kind of trust that person because they're sharing something with us. The other side of that is if we are willing to share deep parts of ourselves with complete strangers and handing the story to them, we also have to be prepared that that story is not going to please everyone. There will be people we know in our lives who are not pleased we told that story or don't understand why we're doing what we're doing in a public way, and who might judge us for that. There will be strangers who don't like our writing style or the topic that we chose or all of the above. And one thing I've learned, not just as a writer, but as a human being, is we are never going to please everyone. I'm not for everyone. My personality is not for everyone. My music taste is not for everyone. I think I'm pretty idiosyncratic. But when you know that, then when the people find you that you are for, it feels like an even tighter community. And then you just kind of let the rest go. I would also say I try not to read comments, period. Like even the positive ones. Praise can sometimes make you complacent, right? Like, oh, I guess I'm doing a great job. I'll pat myself on the back. Um, and criticism can make you feel like you want to give up or feel stuck or feel like regret or feel paralyzed to make the next thing. So really any input can upset the balance of what the next thing you make might look like. And so for me, it's better to just make a thing and then keep my head down and start making the next thing without paying too much attention to how that first thing's being received.
Yeah. I think I can use a lot of things from your family, what you say. I think after that quote, because I was looking, Colleen, I had that same quote or that same part down. Don't yuck my yum. Yeah, don't yuck my yum.
Don't
I
yuck my
love that.
yum.
I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have beauty emergency and don't yuck my yum. Those are two things that are coming
You're,
into the Garratt
you're
household.
rolling your
I love that.
head.
Yeah, we say that all the time in my house. Like, oh, I love this. Oh, I love this song. And my kids like, that song's so dumb. And don't yuck my yum. Or
Yes.
they like something and I'm like, oh yeah, I don't really want to do that. Don't yuck my yum. Like everybody's yum is different. Taste is subjective. And it's okay if you like things that are different from what other people like.
Right, right. I
Yeah.
love it. I love that so much. And another thing, you do teach writing, and something that really stood out to me is that you it's hard, like when you're writing, when you're reading one of your students' writings, they might not write the way that you write, but how do you use your objectiveness to grade that piece, even though it's maybe not your style of writing?
Yeah. I mean, mercifully with grad students, you don't actually grade them. You just give them feedback.
Yeah.
You get an A. You get an A. But yeah, whenever I'm giving feedback to a writer, I'm always cognizant not to try to revise their work to sound like I would write that particular piece. If someone gives me a poem about a tree losing its leaves in fall, I'm not supposed to give them feedback to make it sound like a Maggie Smith poem.
Right.
I'm supposed to give them feedback and ask them probing questions and help them write their best version of that poem in their own voice, doing the work that they want it to do. And so I tend to give a lot less prescriptive advice, like you should do X. And it's a lot more kind of like the homework in the book. It's a lot more invitations. Like, have you thought about trying this? Or what might happen if you dot dot dot? Or do you get the impression that the poem starts here? What would happen if you rearrange these pieces? Or what do you think the title is doing? Would a different title do more work? And I think two things: people like not being told what to do with their own writing, and rightfully so. And also, I think it focuses a little bit more on the process. And so, in answering those questions for themselves, they get to know themselves a little bit better as writers. And then that will have an impact on the next thing they write, and the next thing, and the next thing. It's not about fixing that particular poem, it's about you getting to know yourself better so that you can evolve as a
Right.
writer.
It kind of reminds me of reading that part, a story I hear about my husband when he was a little boy. His mother always says that he went on a field trip and they went to a historical site and they were supposed to write about that. And what he wrote about was the birds, and he wrote about the flowers he saw. And that, so thankfully, that teacher wrote to his mom, don't ever let him lose this. Now I'm going to cry.
Oh,
I'm going to cry.
Oh,
But
I love
usually,
that.
usually Bridgett
usually
makes our
I make
guests
people
cry.
cry. Now I'm crying. But he, like that, she said that, he was, I don't know, second or third grade, and said, thankfully, that teacher did not say, you didn't write about a
Right.
historical, whatever it was. Don't ever let him lose that. And I'm like, and he didn't lose that. I mean, even though wasn't a writer, but he
Yeah.
still has that freedom. I can tell that he feels that freedom where I probably didn't hear the same thing.
Yeah.
He grew up in Ohio. It's something about those Ohio
Ah,
people.
we do have good, yeah, we have good people here. I
Yeah.
love that. I
So,
love that he was
yeah. So
encouraged to pay attention.
he was encouraged. And I do, like you've said that before, sometimes something gets squashed, and just trying to find that freedom back.
Yeah.
And maybe that's something we get with our age too, is that, wait, we realize we can do this. We have this freedom to do this and write what we write and not worry about what anybody else thinks. So I really, I don't know, that just kind of stuck out to me there.
I love that story.
Mm.
You know, one of the things I wonder about with writing, because I do love to write too. And when you write your poems or your books, when you're done, is it a feeling of legacy, like that's going to live on beyond me? Or is it just that you had so much inside that you needed? Is it like satisfaction that you got it out? What do you feel after you're done? Not necessarily a work project, because that's something totally different, but
Yeah.
something that was on your heart or your mind that you got out and you feel like, okay, this is now on paper.
It is satisfying. I mean, I don't really think a lot about legacy because I have no idea what that will be. I don't know what people will still be reading in 50 years or 100 years. I hope some of the things I've written are among what people are reading in 50 or 100 years, but I have no idea. Um, but it does feel satisfying. And I think in some ways for me, it feels like a clearing, like like it's sort of something is kind of opening up because that poem, or especially if it's a book, something I've been writing, for a year or more, has been occupying my space. It's like a companion I've been spending all of this time with, getting it ready, getting it ready, getting it ready. And so when it's finally done, I'm proud of it, the way I am with my children. And actually, books are kind of like kids too, in that I only feel partially responsible for them. I'm sort of like a steward of the work. They're not really mine like my kids. But then once it's over, this big space opens up. I'm like an empty nester again with my ideas. And so then I'm in this really enthusiastic, open headspace of like, so what's next? That's always what happens. It's like, I'm so happy. Congratulations, you're born, book. And now you've left this opening in my life for the next thing. And what does that get to be? And that kind of generative clearing that opens up after a big project is one of the most exciting places to be in, because then you get to choose the next path.
Right.
Well, the fact that this book just came out, so you birthed this book. You're a
Yeah.
writer. It's beautiful. Do you have any idea where you might go next? And of course, we will invite you back when that
I
happens.
Yes.
do. It's a busy time. I have an anthology coming out in the fall in September that I'm co-editing with my dear friend Saeed Jones. It's called The People's Project. And then I have a book of poems, A Suit or a Suitcase, coming out in March 2026. So I'm in
Wow.
copy edits on that, and I'm working on a novel right now. So that will be the
Wow.
next thing. So I don't keep a generative clearing for long.
I was
That
going to say it didn't last very.
no, the generative clearing is like, and what's next? And then I'm
Oh.
so delighted to jump, feet first into whatever that thing's going to be.
Well, thank you for diving feet first into this conversation about your book, because we certainly appreciate it. And we'll have a link to the book in our show notes. Thank you so much, Maggie, for joining us today. We appreciate it.
This was a joy. Thank you.